you can put your own in there. So feel free if you have a question to put it in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll save some questions until the very end. If there's a very relevant one, I'll bring it up at the end of each speaker's talk. So women in conservation. I have been working in conservation for over 30 years, and I have to tell you, women have a special connection to the land. And I have worked with some amazing women. And I just wanted to mention two women who are heroines to me in conservation. One in New Jersey, many of you may have known Betty Wall Johnson. Betty Wall Johnson just passed away at 99 years of age, but she placed a conservation easement on her property with DNR Greenway in 2013. It's 800 acres that surround the northwest corner of Hopewell Borough, and she donated that easement. So no money changed hands. It was completely donated. And that was just one thing she did. She also has helped us preserve many parcels of land, including our St. Michael's Farm Preserve. So she, to me, has been a real heroine of conservation, and I've been honored to work with her. Another heroine, going back to the days when I started in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, was Jerry Knight. And Jerry Knight, her husband wrote Lassie Come Home. One of my favorite things, having watched Lassie as a child, was when I had the opportunity to walk Jerry's property with her. And she said, "Do you want to see where the original Lassie is buried?" I said, "Yes." She had a little statue of a collie. It was beautiful. So she was a wonderful woman who worked in her own community to preserve land. And there are several of those folks on the call today. And I just wanted to call out a couple of people. I could call out many of you. Martha Sapp, who is the head of the New Jersey Green Acres program. Martha, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see you. And I will say the state has been working day by day from home remotely to make sure we get those land deals done. So thank you for that. Also on the call, Lisa Wolf, who is the president of the Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space, is on our call today. And she's a great partner in conservation. We were just on the phone yesterday planning some more land deals. And Gloria Ann Roby, I'm not sure if she got her power back, but she's been very active in East Amwell Township, making sure her own particular lands have been preserved. And I think I saw Pat Coleman join us, who is the president of the Friends of the Abbott Marshlands. So welcome to all of you, and to the rest of you who have been so wonderful in volunteering your time in working with us on preservation in so many ways. I also want to just acknowledge a couple people on the call that you're going to hear about a little bit later in Madeleine's talk. And I know Sophie Glovier is joining us. And Sophie has been a real heroine of conservation in the Princeton area. So I'm delighted I see Sophie. Hi, Sophie, that you're on the call. I know Elaine Buck and Bev Mills, who are with the Stoutsburg-Sauerland African American Museum, are hoping to join us after they finish another meeting, and you'll hear more about them. And I wanted to share with you just a quick quote from Sharon McGee. Many of you know Sharon McGee. She's a birder, and you're going to hear more about her from Madeleine. And she was unable to join us today, but I just love this quote she gave us, and I want to share it. She said, "The loss of biodiversity is my focus. The best contribution I can give is that of a scientist. Data will help us make better decisions." So these are some of the amazing women that we have volunteering with us. And somewhere on this call is my daughter joining us from Arizona, and I'm just delighted she's joining us today. She is she's been a Montessori teacher for 10 years and has connected many children to nature, and now is with the community college working with students. So I'm delighted that Melanie's on the call with us. So with that, I want to introduce our first speaker, my dear friend Florence Wharton. We have been friends since we started working together at the Bucks County Conservancy, which was over 30 years ago. She is a historic preservationist who put together the successful National Register nomination for her hometown of Langhorne Borough, Pennsylvania. She also has led many community efforts in preservation. We worked together at Bucks County Conservancy, and we preserved land up and down the Delaware River and throughout the county. She had a conversation with me last fall that really struck a note with me. And that was when she said, you know, 2020 will be the centennial of women's rights to vote. And it kind of shocked me because I thought, wow, this country's been around 250 years, but women have only been voting for 100 years. So Florence has spent a lot of time researching and putting together presentations and is sharing her presentations with people from the Bucks County Community College and through many different venues. So I'm delighted she's going to kick us off today with a little discussion going back in history. So you can learn a little bit more about how women have come about having this right to vote, but all the other things that are involved and how many things we take for granted today, but they didn't come to be very long ago. So Florence, please take the lead. And I will share the screen after you give your opening remarks.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank Linda Mead, first of all, for this invitation from the DNR Greenway and this opportunity to share Women's Suffrage Centennial that we celebrate this year. The opening of it is women's suffrage movement, and I'll be presenting some dates just to keep us moving along in that time. So it's from 1848 to present day and forward.
And can everyone see my screen? Can you see Florence's PowerPoint? Yes. Okay.
So we'll start off with the women's suffrage movement, how it started, and we'll move along, sharing some of the stories. If you go back, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, she's the one that wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, and it was modeled from our Declaration of Independence, and she presented that at the first Women's Rights Convention. It's 1848. Where were we here in the United States at that time? Girls born into families were the property of their fathers until they married to become property of their husband. Women had no rights to her inheritance, to the custody of her children pending divorce, to speak in public, to own property without a guardian, or actively serve in their church congregations, let alone profit from their own work. Lucretia Mott. Lucretia Mott understood equality. Equality was a way of life in her Quaker family. So between the anti-slavery societies, the deep connection to Quaker roots and principles, it can then be said that the beginning for this movement started in Seneca Falls, New York, that ushered in the first Women's Rights Convention, which they had over that 72-year struggle. Next. It's 1886. It's 1886. Imagine standing on the shores or on a boat in New York Harbor, watching the Statue of Liberty unveiled to the nation. Now, Matilda Jocelyn Gage was a prolific writer, editor of a newspaper, and I share this quote because the sarcasm to represent liberty as a woman, while not one single woman throughout the land is yet in possession of political liberty. During this time, women mobilized within the state's framework, but little progress was achieved despite that the suffrage constitutional amendments were proposed in Congress every year between 1878 and 1920, but were blocked despite tremendous efforts through women's petitions to the legislators, through their speeches, standing on soapboxes, shouting, "Votes for women." Next, Mary Church Terrell. Black interest in women's suffrage followed the lines already in place at that time. The women's organizations ignored or politely turned away Black members. Mary Terrell was one of the first African-American women to earn a college degree. Now, Mary Terrell and other African-American women became a force in their own right, starting organizations that we know now as the NAACP. Alice Paul founded the National Women's Party, and she shook up the entire effort. Now, Alice Paul was born on a large farm in Moorestown, New Jersey, in a Quaker family, delicate in appearance, soft-spoken, and a graduate of Swarthmore College in Philadelphia. Now, she learned her militant tactics when she was in England, supporting the fiery Emmeline Pankhurst. Alice endured prison, hunger strikes, and violent battles, throwing bricks and breaking windows for women's suffrage. Back home here, she realized that music and parades drew a lot more attention than logical arguments, and she took the actions that changed the course. Now, it's ironic that entrance into a war, that is World War I, would have a positive effect, but that's just what it did, motivating the women's conventions to appeal to President Woodrow Wilson, showing him that deciding to fight for democracy in Europe while one half of the population had no rights, well, that must change. Next. Here they are, the Silent Sentinels. They organized this nonviolent, peaceful protest. Bands of women volunteered to stand for hours in all kinds of weather at the gates of the White House. Sometimes they were given a hot beverage or heated bricks to stand on in the bitterest of winter weather, holding their signs and banners. But they did this every day for 2.5 years. Next. Protests led to fines. Fines led to jail. Jail led to Occoquan Workhouse, located outside Washington, D.C., where they had to endure the most inhumane treatment, rotten food, and poor sanitary conditions, to put it mildly. Some on hunger strikes were actually force-fed. Next. Oh, here we are. August 26th, we're at 1920, and it's the passage of the 19th Amendment after 72 years. Now here, Alice Paul is raising a glass held high. In the glass is grape juice, because we were in the process of prohibition. So raise a glass, we're 20 days before the actual centennial. So raise a glass on August 26th, just in 20 days, to the 3 generations of the dedicated, fearless suffs. They called themselves suffs because they were suffragettes. Now, she was quoted as saying it was that it was a triumph. Now, we see how far they came, but let's examine through a few examples of the recent conditions women tolerated in comparison. But it's not ancient history. Until 1973, women were only allowed to serve in the military as nurses and support staff, but we think it's secretaries. Next. Until 1974, women couldn't get a credit card without a husband or a male to co-sign. Next. Ivy League education was denied women. They were not admitted to, as you can see here on the slide, our major universities throughout the country until quite recently. Now, women did have their own universities, but this was, they denied them admittance. Next. In 2009, until 2009, women had no protection against sex-based wage discrimination until the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act was signed into law. Now, currently, the greatest emphasis we see is the right to vote, although it was equality in the workplace that they pressed because of the vital need for better working conditions and wages at that time. Sound familiar? Next. Until 2010, women had to pay more for health insurance than men. Next. The Equal Rights Amendment. A lot of people don't realize it's hiding in the background, but it was proposed by Alice Paul, and you met her before. After the 19th Amendment passed, she started it in 1923. And it was for legal gender equality and to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. And it reads, men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and all places subject to its jurisdiction. It passed in Virginia, the state of Virginia, back in January of 2020. But Congress has kept the timeline away from its full passage. So what we have to do is talk to our legislators and remove the timeline for that to go through. They did it for us. What will you do? Here's Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony standing there. They affectionately called her Aunt Susan during that time. So thank you very much. I appreciated having you here.
Now, Florence, before we let you go, would you just stand up and show us your sash?
Oh, yes. I've got the official votes for women.
Woohoo!
This might have been what a suffragette would be using to march through town and stand on a soapbox.
That looks terrific. Thank you so much for giving context to how far women have come from over 100 years ago until today. Mm-hmm. And it makes it all that more important that we all recognize the importance of voting and women's rights and the fact that women have made such a major impact in conservation. So
that's correct. Yes, very much.
So we're going to now move to the future generation. And we're going to have Madeleine Freundlich talk to us about women in conservation. And I just want to say I first met Madeleine when she was probably 10 or possibly even a little younger. And she had come out on a walk that DNR Greenway did jointly with the watershed at our Greenway Meadows property. And Madeleine back then was very smart, very precocious, told me she wanted to be a park ranger when she grew up. And at the time, we were in the process of thinking about creating a children's discovery trail. So Madeleine helped us create the Children's Discovery Trail. She was actually our advisor for that. And the signage you see along that Children's Discovery Trail on Drake's Corner Road came about because of the ideas that Madeleine brought to us. She is now in the process of finalizing with this presentation her Girl Scout Gold Award, which is the highest award in Girl Scouts. And she actually started with a series of posters that were provided by Florence from the National Alliance of Women. And on those posters, we selected some women in conservation, many of whom you may not have heard of. And Madeleine kind of took it from there. Madeleine's mom is our volunteer coordinator at DNR Greenway, Karen Freundlich, and many of you have met her. So I want to thank Madeleine for joining us. And Madeleine, I'm going to turn it over to you. And after a few opening remarks, I will share the screen and share your PowerPoint.
Perfect. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on this call. I'm really excited to present on the topic of women in conservation and my Gold Award. If it weren't thanks to Linda and then, of course, Ms. Wharton's posters that inspired me to talk and kind of synthesize the intersection between nature and conservation and women's history, this entire project wouldn't have come about. So I'm really thankful for that. Okay, so as you know, as Linda just said, this is part of my Girl Scout Gold Award project, which I'm so grateful to be able to do. If we could go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about myself, just to start this off. I'm a recent graduate of Stuart Country Day School in Princeton, and I'll be heading off to Vassar College in the fall to study philosophy and political science and to work at their ecological preserve. Vassar is actually one of the Seven Sisters colleges that, of course, Florence Wharton mentioned, talking about women's only colleges that really competed with the Ivies during that time when they weren't letting women in. So that's just a fun coincidence. And I'm really glad that my school has that all-female foundation that really coincided with my foundation with Girl Scouts. I've been a Girl Scout since I was in kindergarten, and my absolute favorite part has been going outside and doing all of those outdoor activities. The picture that you see on your right is a picture of me from March when I was with Cindy and the rest of our volunteers clearing out invasive species at the Cedar Ridge Preserve. That sign before we got to it wasn't even visible because there were so many vines covering it. So that was a really great way for us to just start working at the preserve. The picture next to it is also part of my Girl Scout journey. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with Girl Scouts USA on their new cookie box designs. So luckily I got to be in the s'mores package, which features my favorite Girl Scout activity, which is camping. So that was just such an awesome experience. It really kind of rounded out the whole experience for me, being able to be a part of this, do my Gold Award, be outside, and then have it seen on the package using real Girl Scouts doing real activities that go out to the public. So a little more about my Gold Award. I had 3 primary components. So the Girl Scout Gold Award is a project where you address the root cause of an issue and you really work hard to ameliorate that. So I knew off the bat that I wanted to work outside and with a conservation focus with my roots doing conservation at DNR Greenway and all of those trails. It really stuck with me, and I think that has really shaped who I am and what I'm passionate about. I'm also really passionate about women's history and its erasure from popular narratives, especially the idea of wilderness as kind of a male domain, and really showing that women have been intimately connected with that narrative from the beginning. Thus, I wanted to combine these issues to talk about women in conservation in an attempt to resurface these narratives and show how these women have had a physical impact on our global landscape. So as you can see, my project has 3 components. The first was the preserve restoration at Cedar Ridge Preserve that I selected. This preserve had a lot of restoration potential, which is one of the reasons why I chose it. And the second was because its trails are perfect for doing the second part of my component, which is the travel stories. So the working with my fellow panelist, Story Clark, which will be featured later, we used her travel stories company in order to create a GPS triggered audio tour of the trail. So at 10 different stops along the trail, you get to listen to the stories of 10 amazing women globally, nationally, and locally who have so fantastically affected the conservation landscape and allowed us to have land that we can appreciate now and that our generations further will be able to appreciate. I also created a similar tour for my high school's trail, which has a bit of a younger girl focus, and so it allows these girls, Stuart is an all-girls school if you're not familiar, but it allows these girls to see really positive female role models affecting the outdoor landscape. So if they're passionate about that, like I was, they get to see themselves reflected in history, which I think is so, so important. And then the third portion of my project was the creation of more than 15 posters highlighting women in conservation. So through research and personal interviews with a lot of these women, I was able to bring their stories to life for popular consumption. These posters will be on display at the DNR Greenway Conservation Campus, and then we'll head to other institutions such as libraries and land trusts around the area, so they get to see these amazing women as well. As we all know, open space has become even more important in our daily lives right now. So my hope for these posters is to remind people that these women have been intimately connected with the conservation narrative from the beginning, to create more context for conservation, because the issues that they have are issues that we still have and we will continue to have. So we really need to start talking about that and adding a context to demonstrate that these aren't new issues. And then thirdly, to inspire the public to take action and continue these women's visions for a future. So I wanted to introduce you to some of the women I learned about who absolutely fascinated me, but aren't on the Cedar Ridge virtual tour, which we'll do later in my presentation. So this is Rosalie Edge. Rosalie Edge serves as a great reminder that youth activism has always been a driving force in progress, especially in this country. She was an integral force of the New York branch of suffragists who worked with other suffragist icons that Florence Wharton mentioned in her presentation to usher in the 19th Amendment. And she really used her wealth and status as a platform to educate the public on the importance of environmental protection amidst rapid expansion and urban sprawl, especially situated in her hometown of New York City. So her featured quote, "The time to protect species is when they are still common," is just such a timeless reminder for us all to see that the world will be here whether we're here or not. It's our choice whether we get to participate in that. And I think that's something we need to continually be reminded about. So my next lady is Dorothy Cross. She's a local hero that worked at the intersection of history, nature, and education. And her work in archaeology brought to light many important facets of life and culture from the Lenape, who are the indigenous people of this land in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and a large part of Delaware. So the reverence and power that she brought to her field inspired a whole new generation of historians and archaeologists that studied under her where she taught at Hunter College. And just reading about her and all of her work, it really, like I said, it showed that she had such this deep reverence for her work, the Lenape and the land that she was working on, and that really, it inspired the all of her students and anybody who's read about her, honestly. So my next person is Dr. Kriti Karanth. She was a particular favorite of mine to interview. From the start of our email exchanges, one can tell that she's so deeply passionate about her work and about all of the things that she does at the Center for Wildlife Studies that focuses in Asia. So she is an explorer for a new generation. By studying the intersection between wild and urban spaces, she leads the way for natural and sustainable development globally. She's done a lot with, like I said, the intersection with how do we incorporate wild spaces and urban spaces and have enough room for both to coexist. And she's quite young, one of the youngest on this presentation, and she was really an inspiration for me to see how these people are working to continually conserve and protect a world that we might not have in a couple decades due to rampant development, which was an issue in Rosalie Edge's time as well. So now we're on to the virtual tour of Cedar Ridge. As much as I'd love to be with you right now and just go tour the land ourselves, that is unfortunately not a possibility. So I encourage all of you right now, or not right now, but after I'm done this presentation and we finished up our webinar, to go and plan a hike there, because the preserve is beautiful year round, especially now. It's honestly such a wilderness despite its location in Hopewell. Okay, so we're going to start from the west edge of the trail near Stony Brook Road. So if you've ever been to the Cedar Ridge Preserve, you'll see that there's a sparse forest before the meadow. And that forest in the picture is undergoing intense restoration. Our efforts to restore the preserve's natural state reminded me a lot of Wangari Maathai's amazing work as the founder of the Green Belt movement. What started as a plan to stop desertification and soil erosion across Africa has evolved into a vehicle for empowering women and their families across that nation. The act of planting a tree is helping women throughout Africa become stewards of their natural environment. In doing so, they're also able to become powerful champions for sustainable management, water, equitable economic development, good political governance, and ultimately peace. So what started as a simple act of planting a tree has evolved into an entire program that helps thousands and thousands of women. To date, more than 51 million trees have been planted across Kenya to protect critical watersheds, restore thousands of acres of indigenous forests, and empower thousands and thousands of women. So she is one of the more popular people that I think I featured on this trail. She was awarded a Nobel Prize for her peace and environmental work. But I thought she was a great way to start off this trail with somebody who's really powerful and jam-packed with action. So now, walking into the preserve's principal meadow, one is in awe of the wilderness. Brown nesting birds swoop across the grass, birds of prey stoically survey from the trees, and butterflies feast on the milkweed preserved throughout the meadow. As I walk throughout, I periodically like to pick off the wild raspberries that are rampant in the preserve, which are just in peak ripeness right now. So another reason to go visit that preserve. And this really just reminded me of the efforts of Shara McGee and Hannah Suthers, and their efforts to survey, record, and aid birds throughout New Jersey has not only inspired dozens of people to do the same and go to the Washington's Crossing Audubon Society, which was founded, and Baldpate, and all of these places, but it also gave us a new wealth of information about New Jersey local birds. And if you know, the eastern goldfinch is our state bird, and the last time I was there, I saw the most beautiful display of about 4 or 5 of them just flitting across the branches, sort of chasing each other. And it was such a great reminder that even though New Jersey's getting really built up and it's one of the most developed states in our country, it's so important to conserve these pockets of wilderness that we see that are so important to our state. So as you exit the meadow and into the forest, you're presented with 2 distinct paths. One will lead you deeper into the forest, and the other will quickly fold you into the wetlands. However, both lead you to water. By leading the listener through an intersection without choosing a distinct path, I wanted to highlight the intersectionality of one of the most interesting people that I think is on this tour, which are Beverly Mills and Elaine Buck. Their work is a perfect intersection between environmentalism, history, and learning about people of color in New Jersey. My interviews with them really demonstrated how intertwined land and culture are connected. And just if you have the chance to read their book, If These Stones Could Talk, I highly recommend it because it teaches you so much about the New Jersey landscape and the history of people of color in the Sourland Mountains. And it all started with restoring one property, which was an old graveyard. So that's just another example of how these little projects can spiral into so much more. So as you approach the wetlands on the northeast part of the trail, it just makes sense to talk about Story Clark for a little bit. So Linda, if you want to do that.
Sure. So this is a great way to introduce our next speaker as well, Story. And she has been on the national scene preserving land for as long as I can remember. I think we first met at a land trust rally when she was giving a presentation back when she was the executive director of the Jackson Hole Land Trust in Wyoming. And Story lives in Wyoming on a ranch, and I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that. But what I love about Story is she's very creative. She's an entrepreneur, and she is always thinking about new ways that she can connect people and land. She is advancing conservation on a national level and on a local level through the work she does with travel stories. One of the things that is so exciting about travel stories is it can appeal to so many people who just need to have a smartphone, which is something almost everybody has on them all the time, and they can download free tours and they can take tours all over the country and on conservation preserves. So we have used that at DNR Greenway a number of times, and I hope some of you have had a chance to enjoy our Healing Trails tour that we worked with so extensively with Story, and also the tour of our St. Michael's Farm Preserve and the tours at the Abbott Marshlands. Story also, I really impressed me by her ability to work in an area that is relatively new, and that's the area of conservation finance. And a few years ago, Story wrote a book about conservation finance that has really informed land trusts across the country about ways that they can finance the land preservation opportunities that they have. Many land trusts are not as fortunate as DNR Greenway in that New Jersey was the first state to have an open space program and has had open space funding available since 1960. Even with that, there's still a need to come up with private funds to preserve land. And Story, with a great deal of integrity and enthusiasm, takes all of that forward with us by providing us with new ways and new ideas on how we can preserve land and raise the funds to do so. I think on a national level, when I look at all the different people that I've worked with, from Wendy Jackson, Vice President of the Land Trust Alliance, to many people who have done outstanding work with land trusts, Story is really right up there at the top. She is somebody whose work has been absolutely impactful. And through her work, I believe lands are being preserved across the country. So you will hear from her very shortly, and I will now turn this back to Madeleine.
Thank you. So as we go to the 5th location on our tour, you kind of edge across this meadow, which is fenced in, but is wilder than the first one you've ever seen and still bursting with life. And this intersection between kind of closed off land and then wildness reminded me a lot of what Linda does, actually. But she takes places that are seemingly wilder in these places that nobody would think to preserve, and she takes that and she turns that back into something that we can all use. So as many of you know, Linda has been working in conservation for such a long time and has made such an impact. She's worked for over 30 years and directly affected over 20,000 acres in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So what I like is that she's done a lot with not only preservation, but being at like the grassroots level and doing that organization and being kind of that local leader for stuff, which as much as Wangari Maathai's work across an entire continent is so prolific, we need people at the local level doing the same exact thing, because just having that grassroots element and having people on the ground makes such a difference, especially in places, like I said, in New Jersey, which are just so built out. You need people like Linda fighting for the land right here in our local towns. So as you walk around that place and along many parts of the southern edge of the property, you encounter a curiously well-preserved stone wall. Constructed in the early 19th century, these walls were once used to separate livestock from agricultural plots along the land. Through this, I wanted to highlight the work of Winona LaDuke. She has done so much to introduce sustainable development and agricultural practices, especially in the Western United States. In addition to this, her work centers around the reclamation of indigenous land, which I think is a facet of conservation that's often ignored, because as much as we need to conserve our land, we also need to take into account the fact that people's indigenous and rightful land has been stolen from them. And the more that we have people like Winona LaDuke fighting for that and creating sustainable development strategies for the 21st century, we need more people like her to stand up for what is just and what is right in this world. So I thought she was just such a fantastic person to highlight and such a good role model. So as we approach this quite secluded part of the trail, especially with this stunning winter photo in front of us, I wanted to introduce one of my favorite women and somebody who's commonly called the grandmother of conservation, which is Margaret Murray. She's a woman who's deeply impacted the environmental landscape of the United States, but is largely unknown. Her work to create the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, which is the largest and most pristine refuge in the country, is currently being targeted by gas and oil developers who want to take the land out of the hands of the national parks and develop it to get oil. So I thought she was just a great reminder that even though we have women like this in the past, we need to continue their visions and work on that for the future, because this land isn't always the most well protected, especially when you have people with ulterior interests. So especially at this time of year, the preserve with its overabundance of flora and fauna can seem like a little bit of true wilderness. So as you go, you encounter a small creek that may remind you of the vast marshland of the Everglades, which is a national park that owes its entire existence to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. Her passion for activism and vision for the Everglades made her a really prominent woman in the 20th century, but her tireless work really mirrors the activist zeal of the 20th century that I think of. So she worked from everything from women's suffrage to civil rights to environmental and feminist movements throughout the entire 20th century. So I am absolutely in awe of her countless contributions, despite the equally countless obstacles that she had to encounter in order to fight for what she thought was true. So though women are and have always been involved in conservation efforts, there are few whose contributions are as long-lasting and innovative as Liz Putnam. So Liz Putnam created the Student Conservation Association as her senior thesis at Vassar College, which is the college I'll be attending, in 1953. And her vision was to create a place where students can be in the position of power to restore, preserve, and advocate for national parks. So to this day, more than 100,000 students have participated in this project, and every student that has done it has come out more hardworking, confident, and environmentally passionate. So as we come to the end of the trail at Van Dyke Road, the sound of birds and cicadas starts to be overshadowed by passing cars. So despite being immersed in this wilderness, we have to acknowledge that we are in the middle of pretty suburban land. So women like Sophie Glovier have made it their life's mission to ensure that the protection of these spots is continued. So she's a really great local role model, especially in the work that she's done in the Princeton area for incorporating natural land and making it an integral part of urban and suburban planning. So a big part of conserving land is making sure that these properties are accessible and widely known, and Sophie has done just that by working with local government and creating the guidebook for Princeton trails to make them more well-known. So if any of you are near the Hopewell area, like I said, I invite you to visit the Cedar Ridge Preserve because it is beautiful any time of the year, honestly. And let me know if you have any questions and feel free to reach out to me. I hope that these women's stories have inspired you to do just what you can do to further the cause of land preservation. So I thank you, and I'll turn it back to Linda.
So thank you. I think you can see everybody clapping. So I hope that Madeleine's Girl Scout leaders are here on the call, because I personally would give you your gold award right now. That was fantastic, Madeleine. I learned
Thank
about
you so much.
women. Oh my goodness. That was there women that I had not heard of before, women that I knew, but to bring them to that level of detail and interest was just stunning. So thank you for that. And you are truly our future. So
thank you so much.
So you've heard about Story. We don't need to introduce her again. I'm just going to turn it over at this point to Story Clark to bring us kind of a national perspective. And She has spoken at DNR Greenway several times in different ways. And with that, she's talked primarily about some of the projects she works on. And this is really an opportunity to learn a little bit more about personally what motivates her and her story and how some of these ideas have come about. So, Story Clark.
Well, Linda, thank you so much. And can you hear me?
Yes.
That's always the trick with Zoom, right? You go off and start talking and you're on mute. So Linda, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be part of this program. And Madeleine, I'm just blown away. I mean, I have hope for the future. I mean, that was a fabulous presentation, and the way you wound in women and conservation and the past and the future, it was really outstanding. So I stand by Linda in offering you your reward for this, because you did just an absolutely beautiful job. And Linda, I'm going to talk a little bit about you in my presentation, but I do want to say up front that DNR Greenway is really one of the model land trusts in the United States. And so much of it has to do with your vision and your leadership and what you are able to do and the risks you take to be creative, to try new things. And I think that's a very female trait. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. And as I've known you for many years, I think we support each other in our willingness to take risk and our willingness to try new things. And I will start something and then you'll make it happen. And it's really incredible. Or you will start something and I'll try and make it happen. And that's, I talk about both of those in a few minutes. So anyway, thank you. It's an honor to be part of this. I'm not used to giving a presentation that talks about me. And maybe that's another female trait that we don't often talk about ourselves, but Linda insisted, and I learned a lot about thinking about my career. So here we go. So last Sunday, I went for a hike with the #2 woman, or the #2 person at Citibank. That's the international corporation, huge company, Citibank. The flowers were just incredible, as you can see. Those are elephants' heads and Indian paintbrush, and just an incredible array of flowers. And the social distancing was pretty great too, as you can see. And I was so excited to spend a real day with Jane. And so I really hounded her about her leadership style and how she had gotten where she had gotten and why she was so normal, even in this incredible position that she was in. So surprisingly, for a bank executive in a very man's world, she leads with empathy. Very surprising to me, and something that it took a very long time for me to learn, that really the power of women in conservation is empathy. So I thought I would talk a little bit about my path to empathy and how it guided me to conservation innovation and leadership, and how valuable it is to women in conservation, even though it's not the go-to trait, because conservation, like finance, like technology, like the world we live in, is still very much a man's world, and we excel at empathy. So I started here I am, in the woods on Sunday with amazing flowers. So quite a location, quite a place to have a conversation with the #2 at Citibank. So I grew up in New York City, and I fell in love with nature in Central Park. So what is there not about a city park to love, right? This is how you can learn. This is how thousands, millions of people can fall in love with nature, which is in their city parks. And I think one of the things that Linda's excelled at so much is really bringing nature to people. And Central Park is a great example. So I fell absolutely in love with Central Park. When I graduated from college, I moved to DC to work on the Alaska Lands Act, which was to preserve millions of acres in Alaska for people throughout the world. And it was there that I met my first real female mentor, and that was Marty Meary. But it really wasn't until I worked side by side with her in Alaska that I got to find out what kind of a person she was and how she was able to lead with empathy. So I'll tell you a funny little story. So we were in Alaska together, or we were in Alaska, she was there, and I was living in Anchorage and working for the Park Service on conserving these lands. And my roommates and I were so excited because Marty was going to come for dinner. And even then, I mean, she was just the leader, the grandmother, as Madeleine said, of conservation. So I baked a lemon meringue pie because I knew she loved lemon meringue pies. And she didn't show. And we were all so horribly disappointed. But I kept the pie. The next afternoon, she called to say that they had had a malfunction in their airplane while they were touring the Arctic Wildlife Refuge. And they'd had to do a crash landing. And she slept on the tundra until they got apart the next morning so that they could fly home back to Anchorage. But sure enough, she showed up for dinner the next night. So really, that's a sense of what kind of a person she really was, tough as nails. But it wasn't until I moved to Wyoming, into a ranch in Wyoming, that I really got to know Marty and really what she did and how she did it. So Marty was a convener. She had every possible conservation group. She opened her cabin to them. Every Christmas, she had a cookie swap, and everybody was invited to bring their cookies and to share cookies. So we all came in with our specials, but we went out with a huge variety of cookies. And every time I was up there, there were people sitting on her porch, meeting with her. But she also liked to get out in nature, and she hiked and she skied, you know, right to the last few months of her life. Really an absolutely extraordinary person. But when I moved to Wyoming, I moved from Washington, D.C., which at the time was a very male culture, to another very male culture, which is a Wyoming ranch. I have 3 brothers. My husband has 6 brothers. So I was destined to find my career path in conservation in a male kind of way. It's all I knew. So I started 2 conservation organizations in Jackson Hole, and really was heading for a local career. And as Linda has shown all of us, a local career can be incredibly impactful. But then I met 2 men, 2 scientists who were international scientists, Peter Seligman and Russ Minnemeyer. And Peter really became, and Russ became, new mentors for me, in that they showed me what one person can do, and what one person can do even on an international and national scale. So I did all the normal things that male conservationists do. I joined International Conservation Board, Conservation International, which I'm still on after 30 years, horrors. I joined the Land Trust Alliance Board, the University of Wyoming School of the Environment Board, Small Land Trust Board, and I really did what any budding conservationist with a view beyond local would do at the time. And this was really my view of conservation and how we would affect change. It was really a 3-legged stool. It was science, policy, and money. And so I had to figure out from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, how was I going to have the biggest impact, given that those were the 3 legs of the stool. And because Jackson Hole is a tourist destination, there's lots and lots of money coming into the valley. There's lots of money there. I thought maybe I could experiment in new ways to bring money to conservation. So my team and I really tested different techniques of attracting tourist dollars for conservation. We tried a whole series of tests, and were quite successful with many of them. And then I started looking around the country, and I saw that there were other people innovating. Some of them were really following our lead because we had really started some of these programs, but others were coming up with their own. And really there was this grassroots movement throughout the United States to really experiment with conservation techniques, not simply asking for donations, going to foundations, but what could we do that could leverage money, that we could really find where the money is and then connect it to conservation rather than the other way around, which is saying, okay, this is the kind of people who have given to conservation in the past. These are the kind of people who are going to give it to in the future. Let's find why are banks robbed? Because that's where the money is. So we took a different approach and looked for where the money was and figured out ways to move that to conservation. So I started a national consulting business that really looked at other communities and tried to share these techniques between different organizations, and it all led to a book on conservation finance. So that's, once you've written a book, your life again takes a turn and you're off and running. So I was now a leading conservation finance person, but really something was missing. There was a fourth leg on that stool: science, money, and policy. There was more to success in conservation than that. And it was eating away at me to figure out what that was. And I felt I really could be more impactful if I could figure out that fourth leg and really move into it. And so that fourth leg is hearts and minds. And this is where women really, really, really come in, because we understand hearts and minds. It's all about empathy. So how do we connect more people to nature in more memorable and inspiring ways? So I considered religion. Maybe we should be working with faith groups, because faith, spiritualism, it's so part of sort of the unlogical way that people connect. Maybe there was something there. I thought about family. I thought about marketing. And I came up with an idea which took storytelling, which is really at the core of how we have communicated, how we remember, how we make things memorable from the beginning of time. It's really the communication tool of the human race. And I paired it with a smartphone, which is really the communication tool of our time. And my hope was that I could use mobile storytelling for impact. So as we all know, because storytelling is so incredibly impactful, I was hoping that we could use it to make connections between people and place. And those connections could lead to inspiration. And those inspirations could lead to action. So this was this very strange logic that I had, that we could go from storytelling to logic, and we could impact millions of people through the smartphone. So that was the tool that I set out to invent. Our mission was to connect people to places in memorable ways. Very, very simple. This is a DNR Greenway view, and kids do it, but we really needed another tool to help adults do it. And so that was really where I started. So Travel Stories, as you've heard a little bit, launches audio storytelling automatically without looking at or touching your phone. So the idea is to use the phone as a portal to convey inspiring information, not as a distraction. I mean, we're not traveling much these days, right? But when you do remember travel, way back there in February, we remember that people go places and all they're doing is looking at the phone. I wanted to use the phone to get people's eyes lifted from the phone and to really get inspired about where they are. So that was my goal. I was lucky in that I could harness the skyrocketing use of smartphones, the skyrocketing use of smartphones for travel, and the skyrocketing use of podcasts. My hope was to build a library of audio stories for every place in the world, so that the most accessible way that you could be inspired about place would be available for everybody, anywhere. And I wanted to tell the stories of nature, culture, and community, like a good conservationist. You know, since then we've really broadened that, and I'll talk more about it, but this is at the core of what we wanted to do. But I didn't want just to look at Wikipedia and find the stories. I wanted to use local organizations to tell those stories. And we wanted to help them tell them for audio. So these would be new tools that they could have to use for audio, whether it's on their website, on travel stories, however they did. We wanted to help tell what I call super tweets, short 3-minute stories that really inspired. So part of our mission was to become good storytellers and learn how to teach great storytelling. So we could create this gigantic library, but we wouldn't do it. It would be authentic local people and local organizations that would work to tell these stories. So here are just a few things about what Travel Stories does. So as I said, heads up, hands free. Audio triggers, whether you're walking, driving, biking, we even have a chairlift tour. At the pace of your own curiosity. So this is really important. People are a little tired of the tour guide with the flag. They want to be able to stop and get a cup of coffee. They want to be able to move at their own pace. So I wanted to build technology, which is actually pretty challenging to build, that allowed the stories to really launch when you are seeing the sites and only when you're seeing the sites. And I wanted to generate revenue for local organizations. So by sponsoring tours, they alone could be the sponsor on the app and on the tour, which gave them a lot of exposure. But in addition, we have direct support for charities, and we also have the ability to generate revenue through sponsorships and advertising. And that money goes to the local conservation organizations. So in a nutshell, what I wanted to do is help local groups tell their stories their way, to reach new audiences, to meet travelers where they are with multiple interests. We can do a story, a track on wildlife, on art, your own story in different languages, highly accessibly through audio. We also wanted to be there for the organizations, to support them with marketing, with everything they needed, because there are 1 million apps out there, more than 1 million, and we needed to help them get in front of the pack so that people would use the tour. The last and amazing thing is that Travel Stories is largely COVID-proof because we build the tours remotely. The tours can be accessed remotely. So you can take these tours and you can take them by tapping through to each site, or you can run it as a podcast while you're washing your dishes, or you can use Street View and actually walk along and hear the sites. And the tours engage travelers for economic recovery when people are back in a place that they can actually visit and spend some money. So I'm just going to run through a few quick examples of some of the innovators that I had to look for innovators in the land conservation community to use this tool because it was so new and so unusual. And this was 10 years ago when I first got started. Kiowa Land Conservancy was a great innovator. They now have 9 tours of Kiowa Island. Really, really impressive, and they use it for everything. Community education, the city of Austin, Texas, wanted to build a tour for their eco district. State initiatives, we have initiatives with state destination marketing offices, departments of transportation, state parks, and scenic byways. Museums for cultural interpretation. Historic trails. This is a big one, 400 miles across the state of Wyoming. And then our biggest, which came in about 18 months ago, somehow or another, the New York State Thruway Authority decided to hire a Wyoming company to build a tour not only of the new Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, but also of 16 historic towns along the Hudson. And I'd love to play for you for just a minute the little video that we created for them. I've got to find it. Here we go. Can you see this, Linda? Okay.
Sorry, let me unmute myself. At the moment, we're still seeing this slide with the bridge. Beautiful slide.
Okay, let me just, you're gonna have to see my screen here for a minute. I hate to tell you that.
Got it. We can see it now.
Can you hear it?
Just saying play. There's a little delay. Yes.
So let me go back to my presentation. So can you all see my screen again? Mario Cuomo Bridge, great. So that's the kind of thing that we were able to do because of the scale of this project. And it's rolling out right now, and New Yorkers are heading out to visit the region. And this is an amazing, amazing tool for them. So we're working a lot in New York State and in New Jersey, and it's really a region of huge focus, probably because I grew up there, but also there's so many people we could impact about conservation. So as I looked for innovators to help me roll this out, I of course went to Linda. And Linda, as I said, has worked with us on some, or she said, on some amazing tours. She's done travel stories tours in Spanish, really a goal of mine to make these tours as accessible to as many people as possible. She's built amazing tours of places like the St. Michael's Preserve, which has such rich human and natural stories to tell. But really one of the ways that she has innovated, I think the most, is really using mobile audio to inspire exercise and to inspire people to heal. And we heard a little bit about healing trails from Madeleine, and it's really an extraordinary set of tours. It's 3 trails, one for people who really aren't very mobile, one for people who can walk, and one for people who can use a little grade. And I'd like to play one of those sites because today in the world of COVID, it's even more important that we understand the value of nature for healing. And this is a great little segment on that.
Where does healing begin? Nature is endless cycles. New life matures, gives birth to new again. Yet we instinctively know where to begin. A seed falls to earth, touches the soil, and sends out its first trembling shoots. The touch that connects begins a new cycle. Touch tells us we're not alone, even when illness focuses us on pain that we alone experience. We're all connected to the earth, and through it, to each other.
So this idea of healing trails and Linda's really brilliant idea of taking the audio, mobile audio, and really transforming it into a healing tool. There couldn't be a better time for this, right? We're all needing healing, whether we've had COVID, we're sick, we are just isolated, we're like that seed. We're all in need of healing. And so there really wasn't a better time for this to expand. And other land trusts are now starting to use this idea of meditation and healing in their travel stories audio tours. But really one of the things that, sorry, I'm not going to play that one. But really what we wanted to do was we wanted to take this beyond travel stories tours. We wanted to take it to patients. We wanted to take it to healthcare workers. We wanted to take it to families that are suffering right now. And we wanted to use the spaces around those people, the outdoors that they could see, the art on the wall, the little tree in the back, as a way to really prompt great audio stories. So we really took Linda's idea and worked to grow it. And we launched Healing Trails nationally, really taking advantage of the opportunity that this technology gives to tell stories to people who really need well-being, who really need restoration, who really, really, really need to be healed in today's world. So this is our website. It's Healing Trails, and it's healingtrails.health. And we're just starting to get it off the ground now. And we're going first to provide audio for healthcare workers, because to us, they're the ones who are worn down. Those they have no time really to heal. And these are short 10, 20, 30-minute little mini podcasts that really connect the places they are at in their hospital to healing. So it's really an adventure, and we're excited to try it. Sorry about that. So what I wanted to do was tell you a little bit about why I think this all has to do with empathy, and why empathy is so critical to women in conservation. So healing is about empathy, and we are the best listeners. We listen and we learn because we as women are empathetic. We aren't scared to act when we need to, and that makes us innovators. We listen for cues and we take them. We aren't scared of being human and showing that we're human and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. We learn that the long view is what is more important than how we do at any one particular moment. And really, as I moved from quite an isolating role in finance and technology, I started to really see the value of empathy. And it was really why I was drawn to people like Marty, people like Linda, and people like Jane Fraser with Citibank. They are inspired by empathy and they live empathy. And we as people who are empathetic, we as women, recognize that people connect to nature in very different ways. And we hear those strategies and we reach out and make changes in order to meet those needs. So what I learned slowly through my career, and really I think I didn't fully learn it until Healing Trails, was that I can bring a very female trait to conservation, and it will make me much more effective with my staff, with my relation with leaders, with my clients, even with my hard-nosed male investors. It's the power we have. It's scary, and it's much harder for us to lead with empathy, because in a man's world, there's a lot of other ways to lead, but we will be stronger, more powerful, and better conservationists by doing it. So hooray to empathy. Thank you.
Story, thank you so much for that. That was, I think the words I said earlier about you, about being innovative, being creative, being an entrepreneur, being impactful, it is so evident as you gave your talk, and particularly as, you know, we think about how COVID hit in March, mid-March. And here in just a few months, you have turned this into something that with your Healing Trails tours and your national launch, that is really very effective in reaching people when they need it right now. And I know that took a lot of work, a lot of good ideas, and a lot of work, and a lot of dedication and innovation. So congratulations on that. I'm really excited about it. So this was, for me, a fabulous talk today from all of our folks. And you know, we're a little bit over time, so I don't want to, at this point, I don't see any questions on the chat, so I'm going to bring things to conclusion. And I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to go back to Florence, who set the tone with what has happened in the past and where we are, brought us up to today, and what we need to do to continue to work to pass the Equal Rights Amendment and take that forward and vote in the elections, because it's a right that we have won just 100 years ago. So thank you, Florence. And thank you, Madeleine, for inspiring us to the future by showing us some of the women in the past and the women of today that are making a difference and doing it in such an impactful way. And you are going to make your own impact. You already are. And I look forward to finding out what you do in about 20 years. So very excited. And Story, thank you for giving us the national context. That was such an important piece to really understand that, and to hear that, you know, there's a woman in that second place there at Citibank. Now we just need to get her in first place. So, but thank you for bringing us all of that and for everything you do. And for all of you that are on the call, we are building community at DNR Greenway through these virtual events, having shifted and pivoted completely from the on-the-ground events where we get to see you in person, but at least we get to see you on the screen, and we hope you'll continue to join our community and be active with DNR Greenway in this way. Our next event is coming up on August 19th. See if you can see this. We have a new art exhibit, a virtual gallery that has just gone up on our website. Out of the Wild is the new exhibit. And on August 19th, another happy hour at 5 o'clock. And we'll hear from the award-winning artists from this juried show, and we'll hear a little bit about conservation. And one of the things, connecting people to the land, art is another way that we inspire people to really care about the landscape. So we are excited to be able to share that with you. And again, for all of the women on this call that are doing their part in conservation, thank you so much. It's awesome to work with each and every one of you. So thank you, and let's take it forward into the future. So good night, everybody.